Hey everyone, this is Deacon Sarah from Richard Rowland. Back at the start of the year, I uploaded a short video of me reading some poetry from The World Under Starlight, the fantasy setting that I've been working on really basically my entire life. And I think I remember saying something back in January that I was going to try to make a monthly video or a weekly video or something crazy like that. And as you all know by now, that did not happen. And it didn't happen mainly because I've been super busy making content other places, mainly over on Ancient Faith, where my podcasts like How to Be an Orthodox Christian and The Great Rood Screen, which tells the story of the saints of the British Isles before the Great Schism. These places, not to mention the Great Tales podcast, which looks at ancient storytelling through an Orthodox Christian lens, as well as the work that I've been doing over on the Symbolic World and at the Symbolic World Press. So I've not been idle. In fact, I've made probably more content this year than I've ever made before. And I'm very blessed actually to be able to do this for a living now. But in the background, I've never stopped working on The World Under Starlight. So I've got a couple of good updates for you today. One is simply that the tabletop RPG Amboria role-playing in The World Under Starlight, the core rules, and then the Thunder in the North grand campaign book, they're all done. And as of this week, they have gone to the printer. So those books will be printing and shipping to you soon. Now, I know enough about the printing process through my work on Symbolic World at Symbolic World Press by now to know that once the printing process starts, it will usually take a few months for the books to be shipped to the United States and then distributed. So my guess is you can probably look forward in the next 2 to 3 months to having your books, but we'll send out another update via the Kickstarter platform as soon as we have an actual shipping date for you. In the meantime, you're going to get finalized PDFs for those books if you backed at the appropriate levels to do that. And then also we're going to put the PDFs up for sale, I think this week on Drive-Thru RPG. So if you haven't had a chance to buy the PDFs, you'll be able to do it there. Our Backer Kit storefront is still up. So if you want to get a copy, for instance, of the first 2 books of Odes, which are basically, it's the prayer book, it's the daily office book of the Amborian people, you can get a copy there as soon as we close out the Backer Kit store. We'll work on getting those printed. So at least for now, this is going to be your only opportunity to buy those, at least the first editions of them. What else? So I am currently working this year on writing a new Amboria source book. This will be for Sencan, the Holy City. The book will probably be called something like Sencan, the City of 1,000 Springs. And it'll be a full campaign book. It's going to include a setting gazetteer. It will include a mega dungeon beneath the city. It will include basically all the things you need to run a full campaign with a lot of social dynamics, political dynamics, different religious factions and schisms, different crafting guilds, and the way that they all kind of slot into the politics of the Holy City during the late Third Aeon period. All that stuff will be in that book. As I mentioned, there will be a mega dungeon in the catacombs beneath the city where there'll be lots of exploration and weird magical hijinks going on. And the book will probably also include some what I would consider quality of life updates for the rules of the game. These are new subsystems that I've been developing, things like a full herbalism subsystem, crafting guilds, forging, including making magical weapons and armor or other magical, wondrous items, as we'd call them in the game terminology. And these are basically supplements I've made for my players. So everything that is going to be in this book is really made for the players in response to their desires. They want to go deeper into some aspect of the game. And so all of this is coming out of real play, and all of it's been play tested. So all of this will be in that book. And currently the deadline for my finishing that book is the end of November. And then at some point next year, it'll be published. So that's another thing to look forward to. In terms of lore videos, recently, my lovely wife got together some of her friends from her literary circle and said, my husband's got all of this poetry he's written. My wife has always been the biggest fan and supporter of everything that I do. And so she said, my husband's got all this wonderful poetry written about his world, and I would like him to share some of it with you. So earlier this week, we got together and we did a little Zoom call, and I read the Elder Lay of Sencan to them. Now, if you are familiar with The World Under Starlight, if you backed the RPG on Kickstarter, for instance, you probably already have some sense of what the Elder Lay of Sencan is about, but it is one of the important founding myths of Amborian civilization, kind of one of three major founding myths, out of which the civilization of the Amborai comes, which is the main focus of the books, the RPGs, everything I've published about the world under Starlight to date. So what I did was I read through it for them, and then, talked about it a little bit, made some commentary as along the way as I went. So what I did, I recorded myself. I didn't record any of the others. So there's sometimes where I'll be reading their questions or something like that aloud. But I just recorded myself talking to the camera like this as I read the poem to them. And although we did send out an audio of this poem, 3 years ago, back when we did the Kickstarter campaign, what I wanted to do is just to share this most recent telling with you. Maybe it's something, if you're not familiar with the world under Starlight, maybe you'll take a look at it and you'll find it intrigues you, and you can look into buying some of the other books. Next year, I have in mind, as my schedule sort of frees up a little bit, I have in mind to do some more frequent lore updates and storytelling here on the channel. And maybe sometimes just turn on the camera and say, let me tell you a story from the world under Starlight, and just try to tell it to you as an oral story rather than just reading you something off the page. Sometimes we'll read poetry, sometimes we'll do other things like this. But that's what you can look forward to in the future. No promises about frequency just yet. We got to see what next year is going to look like for me work-wise. But I just wanted to make this update and thank you all for your patience, for your patronage, for your support, and let you know that no matter how busy I am, I'm always working on the world under Starlight every single day. There's a new game mechanic that I want to try on my players. There's a new poem. There's a new adventure. There's always something that I'm doing on this every single day of my life. And so I hope to be able to share some of that with you in the future. In any case, here's a recording of the Elder Lay of Sencan. I hope you enjoy this, and I hope that you'll be able to hear from me soon on with more updates about the progress of the world under Starlight. So what I thought I would actually begin with is a little bit of an introduction to the project itself, and then we can talk about the text specifically, if that's all right. I don't know if anybody has a hard deadline. And I'm also, if nobody minds, I'm also going to record myself here. It won't record any of you. It'll just record me. So you don't have to be afraid or worried you won't show up anywhere on the internet. But it is, sometimes it's good to record these things. You might use them later, or it's also good to sometimes go back over things you've done in the past and kind of critique it a little bit. So, but what I wanted to do, there was an interview that I did, which Sophia can send a link to if anybody's interested. There's an interview I did several years ago now with Darkly Bright Press, who published the Amboria. I should have a copy of it to hold up here to the camera, but I don't. There's still a few copies you can get from, I think, 8th Day Books, but we are working on actually putting a new edition out next year. But 8th Day Darkly Bright Press published the initial version of the Amboria, which is basically, you could say, a collection of the early of stories from the early histories. Yeah, there you go. Miss Lady grabbed a copy. It's a book of the early stories, or some of the stories of sort of ancient Amborian history, and just a small collection of them. There's actually a lot more that I hope will go in the next edition. But as part of all of this, the publisher Darkly Bright Press, they did an interview with me, which you could find on their website. And in this, I basically talk about what this project is, why I was doing it, what it means to me, these kinds of things. And also, he asked a lot of questions about my inspirations and so on. And they're the sort of normal things you'd expect. The very first moment that I can remember having, as far as I know, I've always tried to tell stories. I didn't realize it until just recently, but I'm really from a family of natural storytellers. My grandfather and my father to some extent, but even my mom, just are people who, like, even if you talk to somebody in my family on the phone, you will not get off the phone quickly because we have to tell you sort of the whole story. We have to go around in a wide circle, right? And this is how we are. But when I was maybe 10 years old, I read, for the very first time, I read The Lord of the Rings, and I was reading, I think it's Appendix F, where there's a note about languages and translation, because Tolkien's whole Lord of the Rings project has a translation conceit, right? So he says, I found and translated the Red Book of Westermarch. So I'm not the author, I'm just the translator, although translation is definitely a kind of authorship. But in there he says, there's a note about the name of the river Baranduin, which Tolkien translates as Brandywine. And when I first read this passage, it was like, you know, a light switch flicked and, you know, the light bulb came on in my head. There was a thunderclap at that moment because I realized, hey, you could just name a river. And so ever since then, my private motto, which one of my sisters actually painted onto a landscape and framed for me, has been write so that you can name a river. So that was kind of the impetus of a lot of these things early on. This kind of project is something that began for me out of a real desire to try to answer the question of what does it mean for a people to be a people? What does it mean to have a culture? What does it mean to have a culture that's your own? And I think that this is one of the things that drives writers like me to build these kinds of worlds out of an almost existential necessity, right? Something on the order of the need for basic human goods like food and shelter, maybe a little bit, you know, lower down, but still very important. It's a very important need. And so storytelling, which I think is the most profound kind of sense making, is also a basic human good. So for the sub-creator or the constructor of what a friend of mine calls a paracosm, that is like a sub-created world, the act of writing is an act of discovery. It's actually an attempt to discover what is true about your own world, like the world that you live in today, what's really true about this world. And you sort through that by the process of writing and discovery. So there are two really vexing problems about the world around us. One is that reality is too complex for us to easily understand. And so we have to create narratives to help us understand it. And then the other problem is that without sufficient depth, a narrative will have no ability to really satisfy a deep-seated human need for verisimilitude, that is, things that feel real. So on the one hand, you need to make a story about the world in order to understand it. But if that story is not deep enough, if it's not real enough, then it won't actually help you understand the world that you live in. And so the way that I would kind of describe this is to say that all of the really beautiful, lasting cultural artifacts that we have, scripture, liturgy, art, folk songs, traditional dance, and so on, all of these mean something both for the community which they hold together and which preserves them, as well as for the individuals who participate in them, and that these are meanings, all these meanings are overlapping, but they're not quite the same. So the highest things like scripture and liturgy are also capable of connecting us to a dimension which is beyond all of time, and which can make something which happened 2,000 years ago closer to us than what happened yesterday. So the implicit hierarchy of these things makes it possible for what is lower to participate in what is higher. Healthy human culture is a web, therefore, of reference, of relationships, which makes sense of how complex the world is without dissecting it in a way that destroys its beauty. So this is the kind of thing that I was always trying to figure out for myself. And usually, and you know, part of it was when I was young, the culture I was raised in just had a total dearth of a lot of these things. Definitely no liturgy, definitely no traditional dances. Usually fantasy and science fiction authors try to create this effect of an in-depth, interconnected world artificially. And they do this by creating a reference to another work or legend or text or song that doesn't actually exist. So a good example of this is Frank Herbert's Dune. Any Dune fans in the audience, maybe? Frank Herbert's Dune, I only really like the first book, and then they get sort of weirder and weirder. I also kind of like the fourth book. But the heading of each chapter in Frank Herbert's Dune and these successive books include short epigraphs from works of history written by the Princess Irulan, who's a character in the novels, but also you're meant to understand she's kind of the historian that's actually relating the whole history to you that you're reading. But the problem is that these books written by the Princess Irulan don't exist anywhere except in those references. So it's a neat trick. It's a kind of sleight of hand that makes the world feel like it's got depth and history and tradition to it. It's window dressing, if you want to think about it in this way, that serves the more important purposes of the story, which is the novel that Herbert's actually writing. And all of this makes sense, right? If Frank Herbert wants to convey the sense of dimensionality, of depth, and of breadth to his writers, but if he really makes himself sit down and write out the Manual of Muad'Dib and Muad'Dib family commentaries and a child's history of Muad'Dib and Dictionary of Muad'Dib and Analysis, the Arrakeen Crisis written for Bene Gesserit circulation only, and the Humanity of Muad'Dib, and history of the Butlerian Jihad, and collected sayings of the Muad'Dib, and In My Father's House, and the songs of Muad'Dib, and conversations with Muad'Dib, and Arrakis Awakening, and I could go on and on. If Frank Herbert were to say, I'm going to write all of these works out, he'd never have finished Dune. But the thing about me is that I would rather read all of those books than read the novel Dune. Partly because I'm more interested in knowing what the people who live in the world of Dune have to say about it than I am in what Frank Herbert has to say about it. Tolkien expresses this concept when he says, there is no tale without the teller. In other words, every story is told by someone, and that someone is part of and participates in the story that they are telling. So all of this is around about way of kind of describing the project. I'm the guy that never finished the novel. And the reason I never finished the novel is because anytime I came across a cultural artifact, be it a bit of linguistics, be it a story, a song, a legend, a bit of liturgy, but then, liturgy is based on scripture. So then you've got to have scripture to write the liturgy from. So then you have to go back and write that scripture. But then sometimes scripture is based on older things. And so you have to go back and write those older things so you can write the scripture, so you can write the liturgy, so you can write the reference to the liturgy, so you can finish your chapter in the novel. I have never finished the novel. I have over 40,000 lines of poetry. So that's where we are, and that's what this project is. So it's a little crackpot, but I am writing and doing the things that are actually really interesting and important to me, which are mostly languages and poetry. And maybe a novel will happen, maybe it won't. There is a tabletop RPG, and the tabletop RPG basically came out of the fact that my friends got tired of me sending them my poetry constantly all the time, and they said, why don't you just run a game for us set in this world? And then things kind of snowballed from there. So that's actually the current sort of popular version that everything lives in. But for me, it's still very much about the poetry. So one thing that I've tried to do is put the artifacts of the world together in such a way that there's no place to start, which is another way of saying you can start anywhere. It's sort of like saying, where would you pick up reading medieval literature? Well, you could almost start at the end, which would be, Dante. But you could also, and that would actually be a fine place to start, because then you'd have to go look up all the things that Dante references. And by the time you did that and read those things, you'd have the whole, you'd understand everything, right? So in a similar, lesser way, but in a similar way, basically the way this works for me is I've tried to write things such that everything that's basically you can start anywhere. And so each work has a few layers to it. There's the layer of the original composition, and then there will almost always be a layer of commentary. Sometimes these will actually go 3 or 4 deep. So you'll have an original work that's composed, and then somebody else comes and adds on or redacts that, and then somebody else comes along and makes changes to that, and then somebody else compiles everything together and comments on it. Basically, each layer is separated for me by a number of real-time years. So typically speaking, what I would do is I'd write a story, and then I'd come back to it 4 or 5 years later, and then I'd do the next layer. And sometimes I just come back to the same story over years and years. There's no telling when it's going to end. And I sort of keep adding these layers on. And I try as much as possible to do the layers in a different voice, which is not too hard given the fact that, every 4 to 5 years, you're essentially a new person. And so I try to do things in different voices. But in any case, the idea is you have an original text, and then there's a commentary layer. And the commentary layer is usually in the voice of Rinsos. Rinsos is our in-world scribe. He's the chief scribe of the Red Scriptorium on the Red Isle. And he is the one who writes the commentaries for most of these things. And then the layer on top of that would be me as his translator. So that's the conceit that we're working with. And then, yes, somebody Ashley says in the comments, follow the footnotes. So the footnotes are there to basically show that all these references are real references to other things. So there will be lots of references to other works throughout the work that I'm going to read to you tonight. Every single one of them exists. All the languages exist, at least with some amount of vocabulary and grammar. The largest one has maybe 10,000 words. And then some of the other languages have maybe, a few hundred to a few thousand words, depending on how much work I put in on the vocabulary over the years. But all the languages, all the vocabulary, all the grammar exist to some extent, and all the written works that reference also exist. There are histories, chronologies, timelines, all these things. And so when I say something like this was likely composed in the first Aeon, 179 to 283, sometime during the reign of Ranhor. That's a real, as far as I'm concerned, as far as the work is concerned, as far as the conceit is concerned, that's a real person, that's a real reign, and there's real political and historical realities going on at that time, which may have influenced the way that this was composed. So the comment, there's an introduction, which is basically a summary of the whole story, which is going to be in 10 fits or cantos, and then there's a couple of paragraphs on dating and provenance, and there's a few paragraphs on theological and historical importance. So I'm not going to read all of those right now. I'm going to just get into the story. The last thing I'll mention, maybe, if this hasn't been too long-winded of an introduction, is the poem itself. So one of the things that I've done, and I will just say I shamelessly stole this from Tolkien, is to use different poetic meters to signify different styles, dates, or origins for composition. So something Tolkien does, if you pay attention to Lord of the Rings, is that when there's an elf poem, he uses 1 meter. When there's a dwarf poem, he uses another meter. When there's a Rohan poem, he uses another meter. When it's the Men of Gondor, he uses yet another meter. And when it's the Eagles sing in a non-metrical, a positive, or rather, what's the word for this? It's the kind of poetry that is used in the Psalms, parallelisms. So you have actually all these different meters that are used within Tolkien to kind of signify different races, different ages, different forms of composition. So I've done the same thing with the Amborian material. Now, all the Amborian stuff really just concerns one race. It's not like a fantasy world where you have lots and lots of races. They are the others that are there on the edge. But all the stuff that I'm interested in is telling the story and the culture of the Amborian people. So within, over the course of Amborian history, there's different styles of composition, but there's also different contexts which influence this. So the way that this is represented in English, let's say in English translation, the way that this is represented is different meters to signify different origins. So anything that is meant to be sort of courtly poetry, like a courtly romance, or a sonnet or something like this, is going to be in some Elizabethan form. Not always the ones that you would necessarily expect. I particularly like a lot of rhyme royal and things like this, which are sort of, somewhere between Chaucer and Shakespeare. I also might use, for a country ballad, I might use a more sort of typical English ballad meter, that sort of Gilligan's Island, Amazing Grace, Emily Dickinson meter. And then for anything that's either meant to be very ancient or meant to be liturgical, in other words, trying to emulate the style of something ancient, I use what is called sometimes called the Kalevala meter, or if you're familiar with the Song of Hiawatha. To use a more recent example, this is trochaic tetrameter. This is also the way that Tom Bombadil talks in The Lord of the Rings. But it's this, so it's going to end on an unstressed syllable, and it gives it this kind of strange, almost sing-songy, lilting, chanty sort of a tone. So that's the meter, and I do a lot of rhymed poetry. Tonight's poem will not be rhymed because this is meant to seem like it's very old. The thing that this should approximate to would be something like Beowulf, Old English verse, Old Norse verse, something like that. So because of that, it's not going to rhyme. It's got other things going on poetically, but I am a huge fan of poetry that rhymes, poetry that has meter. I'm not a huge fan of what is often called free verse, which is sometimes just an excuse for, not understanding how a meter works. So that being said, the story today is about the hero Sencan, who is some combination of, you could say, David and Moses for the Amborian people. He is the one who delivers them from bondage. They've been in bondage in a place that used to be their homeland, that once called the Hills of Jade, with 7 shining cities on a hill. And then the whole thing is taken over through treachery, and they're subjected to Orkhan, who is a fallen star in this world. Stars and planets are basically angels. Actually, they're that in our world too, but I can't get into it right now. And so Orkhan and his servants subject the Amborian people, and they become slaves for many hundreds of years, possibly many aeons, in the mines of torment underneath what are now called the Black Hills. And finally, it will be Sencan who leads them to freedom. So when he leads them to freedom, he will lead them across the northern moors on a march across the north, and eventually arrive at an ancient sacred site, very sacred to his own ancestors, sacred even long before, let's say, Amborian prehistory, a place called the Sacred Hill or the Hill of Orusen. So if you hear references to a holy hilltop, a sacred hill, the Hill of Orusena, etc., that is what we're talking about. This is for Amborians, the most sacred place in the cosmos. It is the Axis Mundi, the center of the world. It is the place in which the foot of the Creator touched down at the creation of the world, and which the first waters of the world were drawn up out of the abyss by the Creator's beauty to fill the world with life. So, if you hear some references to that, if you hear references to Orusena's distant ancestor who comes in prehistorical times to slay the serpent and protect the waters, if you hear references to Lananomen is another distant ancestor descended from the Western stars who came and originally founded the first civilization in the Jade Hills. Ashley asks, is Orusen connected to the name Sencan? So quick note about what the names mean. Orusen means sharp, basically it just means sharp. It probably means something like sharp-witted, and so in this sense it is connected to Sencan, but not etymologically, just more sort of conceptually. The name Sencan itself means deep, profound, wise. It's connected to the idea of being old. It is to denote that he is a person of great wisdom. And in fact, one of the legends concerning him is that when he is born, he's already born with white hair and the ability to speak in full sentences. In other words, like he's like an old baby when he's born. Not quite a Benjamin Button sort of thing, more of maybe like a Noah or Melchizedek kind of a thing, but this is the idea. So, yeah, Ashley says like Orthanc. Yeah, to some extent, yeah. Orusen is related etymologically in Amborian to other words that have to deal with sharp things. Orusen is, for instance, related to Orupeim, which is the word for sword, one of the many words for sword. So yeah, definitely. But in this case, it means like cunning, wisdom. And so the two words are related in that sense. All right, so the present work is called the Elder Lay of Sencan. It is the work from which the liturgical hymns for the Feast of Sencan are largely derived. So this is a case of, before I could write the liturgy for the Feast of Sencan, I had to first go and write this. And this story is based on still yet older stories that I had written before. So what I'm going to do now is just I read it, and I will maybe during the readings I will occasionally stop and comment on things, and then if anybody's got questions afterwards, I'll be happy to answer them. So this is where we would ring a gong or play a drum or strum a lyre. But since I don't have any of those things here tonight, people, sing the hero's praises. Sencan, famous king and warrior, he who far beneath the mountain, on the anvil of his fathers, forged the blade of living iron. Bright Orupeim the shining, he it was who founded cities, strong in battle, and the armies of the southern stars he vanquished. At the foothills of the mountains, mountain tombs of Dalian fathers, high above the plain of Denfeld, now we keep his solemn feast day, now with trumpets and with cymbals, with the silver harps and voices of his faithful sons and daughters. All these instruments of beauty we enlist to do him honor. In the darkness under mountain, see his mother, Ayuvaria. See her striving in her labor, her travail amid the darkness. Pangs of labor, blows like hammers, as a mighty sun she brings forth, deep within the mines of torment. Now, my husband, hearken to me, hear the words of Ayuvaria. I have worked a mighty labor. I have forged a son and hero. He will be the sword of heaven. Sword of heaven, Aralatha. This I name the one I bear you. With the eyes of death I see him, high upon a holy hilltop. There the cypress trees are bowing. There the pelican is singing. There the children of the water drink the wine of distant countries, eat the fruits of southern orchards. White their teeth and bright their faces, with the milk the sons of giants send for tribute, milk and cheeses from the cattle of the evening, from the rams of scarlet morning. On his brow a star is shining, like the pole star long denied us, which our father Lananomen once upon the field of battle heard and heeded, led his people from the ruin of ancient Starland. Now our son must lead his people. He must learn the arts of smithing, learn to lift the heavy hammer, learn to work the ancient bellows which you hide in deepest caverns, where no hated son of darkness, Naushbori, will find and seize them. Take the anvil of your fathers, magic stone which Laninomen gave to ancient Orusena, first of fathers, for his daughter. Pale and lovely Alietalia, long ago in ancient ages, hide it in the deepest cavern, far beneath the mountain's mantle, lay there weapons, gems and armor, bronze and iron, shining copper, and the gleaming living crystal, ice blue Hurpalb, rarest metal, treasure of our ancient fathers, coveted by hated Orkhan. Hide these treasures for our offspring. For the hero I will bear you. I will go to death before you, go to ask the help of heaven. Then the shining eyes of heaven will look down upon our people. Heaven's mighty arm be lifted. Heaven's sword be drawn to save us. This the eyes of death have shown me. Now he comes, our son and hero. Now I climb the silver stairway. So there's a lot of references just here in the first and second main fits or cantos. Aruvaria is the name of Sencan's mother is welcome, means welcome or embrace. Sencan's father Darial has a Dalian name, so the Amborian language is made up actually of a merger of two languages, mainly Trayan, but also a lot of Dalian vocabulary and some grammar comes in. The Dalians are a human people from the south, whereas the Trayans are descended from the stars of the western sky who became mortal. And so there's some notes in the document about linguistic evidence for dating the poem and so on. She gives him the name Aralatha, which means star victory. And so this is one of his lesser known names. He's normally just called Sencan. But you could say that Aralatha is his mother's name. Sencan is his father name. There's references here to cypress and pelicans. These are both sacred trees and sacred birds for the Amborai. Specifically, the pelican is the sign of Sencan's house. And the reference here to the Naushbori refers to the monstrous races bound to Orkhan's service, but especially to those descendants of those Amborai who were ruined and corrupted by him and who became twisted in various ways. And the reference here to the Silver Stairway is a reference to Amborian cosmology and the belief of what happens to the righteous after their death. So this then brings us on to the birth and the first words of Sencan. Sencan, son of Ayuvaria and of Darial heavy-handed, shining came forth from his mother, last of all the ancient heroes of the days before the children first had reckoned by the aeons the years of peace that Sencan brought them. He was shining, speaking wisdom, and his hair at birth was hoary, cutting Darial heavy-handed, looked upon the son she bore him, Ayuvaria, best of women, and, foreseeing crown and kingship, named him Sencan, wisdom ruler. Sencan raised his father's hammer, raised it high aloft. The infant spoke a word of wisdom to him. High above, the stars are shining, and the queen of deadly winter closes gates and hoards her treasures, while the sun, triumphant shining, calls the world again from slumber. All things keep their course appointed. Now the springtime is beginning, springtime of the water's children. Then did Darial, best of blacksmiths, gather treasures from his captors, gold and gemstones, shining copper, ingots of the finest iron, bars of all the choicest metals. Stole he too a gem of Hurpalb, great and gleaming like an apple. Light was frozen in its crystal, like the palaces of winter which in after days the kingless built beyond the world of sunlight. Greatest treasure of his fathers, Orusena's precious anvil, seven-sided, forged of starstone, Darial hid in deepest cavern, where no Naushbori would venture. There he hid the wondrous child. There he taught the skill of smithcraft, which the folk of sky and water still remembered, though in shackles. So Darial takes the advice of his dying wife, and he takes this magic anvil, which has been passed down from his fathers. He also takes other various elements that you would need to forge a weapon, and slowly sort of stealing them one by one, hides them, secretes them down in a chamber so deep within the mountain that none of their captors would think to look there. And then as his son becomes old enough, he begins to teach his son the Song of Iron, that is, how to forge a weapon. Mighty Dariel, famed for smithcraft, taught his son the Song of Iron, taught him how to heat the ingots, taught him how to work the bellows, whisper words of power to them, tell them the tales of earth unbroken, long before the stars were shattered. Mighty Dariel, famed for smithcraft, taught his son the Song of Water, how to quench the glowing iron in the waters drawn at midnight, under stars of winter shining, when the book at last is closing on the words and tears of mankind. Mighty Dariel, famed for smithcraft, taught his son the song the hammer sings upon the anvil, holy anvil forged in Starland by the hammer which the fathers of the Trajan people, Fehoth, brought from middle heaven's forges long ago in ancient ages. All these secrets Dariel taught him while the water's children groaned in anguish, wept in torment. Sencan saw his people suffer, and his heart was almost broken. 7 times upon the anvil, Sencan sought to forge a weapon which would challenge Orkhan's power. 7 times did Aralatha, this is his other name, strike the iron in his raging for the tears his people shed in slavery to the darkness. 7 times he marred the iron, and the blades he tempered shattered. Son of holy Ayuvarya, see the blades you temper shatter. See your wrath and grief together cannot sing the song of iron. Thus spoke Dariel, famed for smithcraft. Hear me, father, see my anger. See how all your people suffer. In my grief I strike the iron, in my grief I break the hammer, broken like the water's children. Once I'd loved a lovely maiden, born to chains beneath the mountain. Once I loved her, and she perished under lash of sons of darkness, Naushpori, for so I named them, so I call them, O ever after. Took her to the throne of Orkhan, took her to the vulture's altar, there to offer her in worship. Bloody rites performed in darkness. Now I forge a sword of vengeance, sword to challenge Orkhan's power. Thus spoke Sencan, son of Dariel. Blades of vengeance, forged in anger, always shatter if the wielder cannot master all the passion which is stirring in his belly. You were made for more than vengeance. You were made for throne and kingship. Far away amid the forest, where the sons of Orusena still unbowed oppose the darkness, learn the bitter song of sorrow. Learn to sing the song of iron. Then a mighty blade of rule you will forge beneath the mountain. Many blades upon this anvil you will forge before another comes to teach the song of Hurpalb, living crystal. Then a weapon fit to challenge Orkhan's power you will forge here. I have seen it. With the eyes of death approaching, you will break the chains of slavery. Thus spoke Dariel, famed for smithcraft, and his tomb beneath the mountains lies, unconquered by the darkness. So there's a lot to comment on here, but the implication here is that Sencan is trying to learn to forge, but like many great epic heroes, he breaks everything that he does. This is true of Kullervo in the Kalevala or Turin Turambar in the Silmarillion. But in his case, the reason is because he's so full of anger and rage against the Naushpuri. And the implication is he's the first one to call them this, the children of the darkness, in the same way that the Ambori are the children of the water. But but that his anger comes not just from sort of the general oppression of his people, but actually from the fact that there was a young woman with whom he was in love, and that she was tortured and killed by the monsters, and ultimately sacrificed upon the vulture of Turan Turor, the bloody vulture. This is a dark god of death that was worshipped by the Trayanral in their fall, and is believed to be an aspect of Orkhan. Orkhan being the great enemy, the fallen star, who's the great enemy of the Amborian people. And so this is who the monsters are worshipping. Maybe some of the turncoats, the quislings, the rebels are worshipping. And so this girl that he loved, she's tortured and ultimately sacrificed on that altar. And so what he wants to do now is to forge a sword of vengeance. And what his father Dariel tells him is, you have to master your vengeance, you have to master your passions. I've taught you everything I can, but it won't be enough, and one day someone else is going to come and teach you one more song that is one more way of forging, and that is the way of forging Hurpalb. This is the living crystal, the great treasure of the Hills of Jade, the great treasure which Orkhan wants the most, which has the ability to make living weapons. So this then brings us to one of the most famous passages in all of Amborian literature, which is usually called the Six Labors of Sencan. There's a few different versions of it, and it is a little complicated, but it's generally believed that this section here, this next canto, which I'm about to read, is actually based on the older hymn that is known as the second hymn of forging, and not the other way around. But in any case, in the darkness under mountain, far beneath the throne of Orkhan, and the ancient home the children of the western stars once founded, on the anvil of his fathers, Sencan forged a blade for battle. 7 times he smote the anvil, 7 times it pealed out thunder, 7 times the sparks flew upward, till he 7 sevens numbered. 7 works of battle wonder Sencan forged beneath the mountain, wrought upon his father's anvil, under Laninomen's city. Verialsuya, weed of battle, first he quenched in holy waters, which in after days the princes of the Amborai all wielded. That is, it becomes the blade of the crown princes. Fair it was, a brand for battle, but the awful might of Orkhan Sencan knew it could not challenge. So he forged another weapon. Sencan forged another weapon on the anvil of his father. Ericnath, the brazen beater, famous was that battle hammer, shields of foemen soon to shatter. But the throne of ancient Orkhan Sencan knew it would not shatter, so he made another weapon. Inrarstana, eagle's courage. All that blade was set with carvings, runes of power blazing brightly, bright and famous, forged for battle was that blade, the third of weapons Sencan forged to challenge Orkhan. But a greater blade was needed. Sencan took the living crystal, took the Hurpalb which his father, Darial famed for deeds of smithcraft, hid beneath the mountain's mantle. A Supesh Paru, miner's sickle, Sencan forged to reap a harvest, bloody harvest of his foemen in the coming days of warfare. 5th, untiring, not forgetting all the torments which the maiden whom he loved endured, the torture and the harsh and laughing voices of the ones who broke her bone house, Sencan forged a mighty war sword, Inafal, the shining lion. But no blade which Sencan's hammer yet had forged could challenge Orkhan, he who long ago in heaven first was born, after Vishnar, in the southern petal shining. Then his 6th and greatest labor, save for one, Darial's offspring, on the forge beneath the mountain then began, and thrice 2 winters toiled he, and great that forging. Then the work at last completed, he beheld it, blade of fire, red Lan Oru Paim the shining, greatest weapon forged for battle by the skillful hands of mortals. Yet it was not doomed for battle with the awful might of Orkhan. Sencan wept before the anvil, and his strength was spent and broken. So Sencan attempts to forge these 7 weapons, but ultimately he knows none of them will be great enough to vanquish his foe and free his people. So he's going to need a little help from his mother. In the heights of middle heaven, Ayuvarya, best of mothers, dwelled amid the verdant meadows where the ram of dawn was bounding, where the righteous heroes gather there to keep a gladsome vigil. Ayuvara, best of mothers, saw the anguish of her child, and she sang a song of sorrow. Holy heavens, highest voices, you who keep the dance and vigil, long appointed for creation, hear my crying, mother's sorrow. My lament for only child, Aralatha, sword of heaven, Sencan, as his father named him. Now he toils in the darkness on the anvil of his fathers. All the skill his father taught him, mighty Darial, famed for smithcraft, all those skills at last have failed him, and no blade his shining hammer can yet forge to challenge Orkhan, he who once amid your number brightly shone and sung the chorus which the southern stars remember. Mighty in his awful malice, skilled in arts of death and slavery, which I will not dare to mention or to name here, where the righteous rest with all their labors ended. Against such malice, awful power, what can mortal man accomplish? Send him aid now, stars of heaven, you who once to Lananomen promised that another homeland, sacred lands, and shining cities would be given. And this promise then was crowned on field of battle with the giants skilled in magic. Lananomen slew the giants with the blessing of the heavens, crushed their heads. All their magic failed against the will of heaven. Now the son of Lananomen and of mighty Orusena help against the rebel archons. Stars the firmament rejected. Do not leave us heavy-hearted. Do not let our people languish in the mines of cruel torment. So this is her prayer. In the heavens, mighty Reos, he who loved the water's children, heard her crying, mother's pleading, and a shaft of light descended from the heights of middle heaven, through the airs of lower heaven, where the silver hunter roaming saw it passing, and the people of the birds his holy coming sang to welcome, sang in gladness. Through a chasm in the mantle of the earth, the starlight glimmered, through a path which was no wider than the cubit of the workman, crack which long ago upheavals first had formed, when red mantle of the earth was marred and broken by the fall of Vishnar's forces, when the war in heaven ended. There, before the ancient anvil where he stood, the son of Derial, weeping for the chains and torment of his people and his failure. There the ray of light illumined, and the anvil shone and sparkled. Holy Reos, northern pole star, stood before the son of Derial, and his garment shone like silver, and his eyes were blue as glaciers. Ayuvara's child Sencan, Reos said, and fair as springtime was his voice, like many waters. I have come, as once I promised to your fathers Lananomen, and to mighty Orusena. Now upon your father's anvil we will forge a mighty weapon, sword to challenge Orkon's kingdom, sword to lead your father's people. So Reos is the pole star of the northern sky. He is the star closest to, and therefore the most knowledgeable about deep heaven. That is, he's the star closest to God. You can sort of think of him as an archangel, if that's helpful. Reos taught the hero Sencan, taught him of the song the hammer sings in mansions high above us, high above the world of mortals where the starfolk dwell and glisten. Reos taught the song of fire, light which burned before the waters of the world had sprung and babbled, when the word of Nankanella, ageless song, first was uttered. Sencan learned the song of waters, springing out of lightless reaches far beneath the world of mortals, following the hallowed footsteps, following the tread of beauty. Sencan learned the song of Hurpalb, growing in the lightless places far beneath the mountain's mantle, how it sung in icy music, songs no son of woman living ever heard, but madness took him. That song's beauty and its strangeness are beyond the thoughts of mortals, if their ears can even hear it. Sencan learned the song of letters, cunning runes in fire written in the tongue the stars spoke long before the world was founded. Many years beneath the mountains, Sencan learned the song the stars sing. Then at last, a seventh weapon, from the final living crystal which his father, mighty Derial, once had hid beside the anvil, Sencan forged, and great its glory. Dark beneath the deepest dungeon, far beneath the mountain's mantle, Sencan forged a seventh weapon, forged it with his father's hammer. 7 times he smote the anvil, every smiting rang like thunder, till he 7 sevens numbered. Shining blade of living metal, breathing steel by magic quickened, Sencan forged, and on it written in the letters Reos taught him, runes devised in middle heaven, where the fates of earth are shining in adamantine tablets written, this inscription of his kingship. Bright Hur Paim the shining, so this blade is called by Sencan, and his heirs shall e'er possess it, while this mortal world continues, while life lingers under starlight. The sword was forged. Now Sencan waited till the time was ripe to use it. Sencan forged a mighty weapon, shining blade of living metal. Never will I forge another, said the famous son of Derial. Never will I forge a better. Now this blade will be my hammer. With it I will forge a nation. Then he rose amid the darkness, and he went unto his people. On a time when tyrant Vishnar called away his greatest servants to the south to pay him homage, then did Orkhan, vile deceiver, grudging go to pay obeisance. Then the children of the water gathered at the feet of Sencan, then he roused their hearts for battle. Then he said these words unto them. Children of the sky and water, for too long has Orkhan's shadow severed you from wind and starlight. Now the time has come for battle, now the day has come for freedom. Forth we go and fear no darkness. Let us seize the gates of iron. Then the children of the shadow fled before the light of Sencan, blazing brightly from that weapon which he forged by help of heaven. On they marched, nothing stayed them, till they came unto the portal, mighty gates of blackest iron, which the hand of evil Orkhan forged, when of the 7 cities mighty Lananomen founded, the Dark One made a vile prison. There, before the gates of iron, Sencan's host was swiftly halted, gathered all the hosts of Nalshbo, children of an ancient treachery. When came Orkhan open-handed to the 7 cities founded by the Trajan remnant weary long ago in ancient ages. In those days the Trajan kingdom fell when Orkhan, croaking vulture, offered them an ageless rule as his thralls if they would serve him. Deathless will you dwell in splendor, living ageless under starlight. If you sing the bloody vulture's song amid the moonless darkness, sing at midnight when the hunter does not roam amid the heavens. Sing my hymns and make oblation in the dark of moonless midnight. Then an ageless life I give you, and your splendor will be greater than the might of ancient starland, than the glory of your fathers. Thus did lying Orkhan offer. Of the 7 kings who heard him, 5 accepted. Now those monsters stood before the gates of iron, they and all the children, the Shadow's children, those who offered service freely to the enemy of mankind. And so their noble blood defiled, mingled it with blood of demons. Monsters heaven's wrath had punished hatefully before the portal. They withstood the host of Sencan. Thus, then did Sencan issue challenge, called them craven, Orkhan's servants. Come and face me, give me battle. Mighty kings of ancient ages should not fear to face in battle one whose father smelted iron. Irakan, the greatest monarch, greatest of those famous traitors, rose and answered Sencan's challenge. High he raised an axe above him, and the screams of countless victims echoed from the pitted iron. But the blade of ice that glistens brought bright Hur-Orupaim the shining, like a star amid the darkness, shone and sang a song to mock him. Mighty strokes the mate of monsters aimed to slay the son of Darial, but the blade of Sencan matched them, ever singing, ever keening, till at last the axe blade shattered. Then the giant's knees were severed. Blood went spurting from his shoulders. Then the host of Orkhan trembled, until Orat, king of traitors, second greatest of those monsters, drew his sword to answer challenge. Less in stature than his brother, greater in devising torments, Orat's visage sudden terror struck into the water's children. By the way, water's children is a name for the Amborai, the Amborians. Usually, Amborai literally means water's children. They are also sometimes called the children of starlight and water, or water and starlight. So, loudly sang the sword of Sencan, keening with the joy of battle, swiftly struck the hand of Sencan, and the breast he clave asunder, pierced the heart of beastly Orat. Sna Moel of gnawing hunger next stood forth with branded truncheon. He aforetime was a glutton, now he drank the blood of kinsmen, and upon their flesh he feasted. Snamoel devours armies numberless, his teeth and sharpened on the bones of water's children. Now your host I will devour, come and slake my thirst for slaughter. So spoke Snamoel the glutton. Sang Sencan's weapon, living iron, sang a song to mock the traitor, sang a song to mock his belly. Many kingdoms you devoured, but the sword of Sencan's kingship you may find a bone to choke you. Sencan slew that awful glutton, and the hosts of Orkhan trembled. 2 more kings gave Sencan battle, Tiktal, Tiklet, his brother. They were twins, their spears were iron, but their might combined together could not overthrow the champion, mighty son of Ayuvaria, and he slew them both in battle. Then the hosts of Orkhan scattered. Then the gates of iron opened. Senkan's people, Water's children, looked upon the stars of heaven, and the summer night was shining. Long the passage of the moorland, long the march of Senkan's people. Many evils they encountered, many sorrows Senkan suffered, ere he came unto the forest where his city would be founded. On the road the people grumbled. Uralesh, a mighty mason, spoke against the march of Senkan. Evil fortunes drive us onward, onward from the mines of torment, to an evil fate appointed, to a bondage all surpassing. Vishnar, pole star of the lotus, mightiest above all mortals, dwelling now beneath the starlight, will not brook this new rebellion. Long his arm and deep his malice. He will crush the water's children, blot us out beneath the heavens. We should seek another homeland far beyond the reach of Orkhan, far beyond the reach of Vishnar, where the mighty gates of winter will defend us, give us shelter. Long that road, if you will seek it, so said Senkan, son of Darial. I am named the Sword of Heaven. It was I, with heaven's blessing, who the sword of ice that glistens forged upon my father's anvil. Heaven's help will not forsake us, not while we obey the vision Rheos gave us, greatest pole star. North Star guiding Lananomen, ancient help of Orusena, now he aids the water's children, leads us on to found a city, where the heavy yoke of Orkhan and the awful wrath of Vishnar never shall my peoples threaten, not while Senkan's sword is wielded by an heir of Senkan's household. Senkan's might is not in question, yet the might of Vishnar stronger is than can of mortals living. Stronger even than those heroes, ancient heroes you call fathers, is the malice of that dark one. Lananom and Orusena, all the host of ancient heroes, could not seek to match his fury or the power of his malice, if the pastures of the righteous they forsook and came to aid us, rising from their graves for battle. Uralesh, the brawny mason, spoke these words, and all who heard him doubted Senkan and his vision. Senkan stood, the sword of heaven, mighty son of Ayuvarya, and his voice was like a trumpet. Uralesh, your words are cunning, cunning as the mason's chisel. Many works of wondrous beauty you would carve if to the city Rheos promised you would follow, one whose fate the stars have written. Now your fate beyond the promise lies, where ice is raised like mountains, and the hoary queen of winter spins the snows, the book adorning. Turn aside, your pride abating. Even now the water's children, many songs in later ages, still might sing of cunning stonework wrought by Uralesh the mighty in the days of ancient glory. Long the war of words embattled, grave the strife between the kinsmen, and the children's hearts were troubled. Uralesh at last departed, he and those who most feared Vishnar, on a long and bitter journey to the land of ice and shadows, far away from Rheos' promise and the memory of the children. But as for Senkan, Senkan passed beyond the shadow of the reach of Orkhan's power. Senkan passed beyond the rivers of all river waters oldest, flowing down from mighty glaciers. This is the river Chaith. Senkan passed beyond the forest, withered, stony, full of monsters. Senkan found another river, mighty Ralar, waters flowing. There in after days a city. Senkan's kinsman, red-haired Ralus, raised and guarded, kept the kingdom safe from marching hordes of foemen. Senkan passed into a forest ancient. There, upon a holy hilltop, he would found a mighty city, one to last the endless ages. Senkan's host was in the forest, wandering in trackless pathways, lost in madness, blind and starving, while the eyes of forest people watched them from the boughs of cedars. Poisoned arrows swiftly winging claimed the life of Senkan's squire Oruneva. High and shining, Senkan drew the living weapon. Bright Orupaim the shining, blade of ice that quickly glistens. I am Senkan, son of Darial, latest son of highest lineage known to mortals. Orusena was my father. Lananomen, first in rank among my sires, came in ancient times to this forest, dark and ancient. Here he found a better welcome than the madness and the hunger and the poisoned secret arrows. Now by right of ancient lineage and the will of highest heaven, now I claim a kinsman's welcome and a weregeld for my servant, slain in ambush by his kinsman. If there yet be in this forest any children who remember still the names of Lananomen, Orusena, first of fathers, and of bright and shining Rheos. He it was who taught me warfare and the forging of this weapon, greatest brand of battle iron ever wielded under starlight. Fair Hassania, dark and lovely. Fair Hassania, tall and queenly. She it was who from the shadows first his challenge forth to answer stepped, and Sencan saw and loved her. Laninomen's mighty offspring must forgive a leaguered people. Many hosts from Orkon's stronghold forth have issued, bringing horrors spawned by demon to the darkness. We have lost the song of table, and the laws of Orusena, binding host and guest together, and we feared the shining brightness of your eyes, and fled your coming. I will take you to my father. You will find a better welcome when you see the holy hilltop, ringed by ancient elms and cedars, and the tall and holy cypress. There our fathers, ancient heroes, swore a lasting oath of friendship. There our people, reunited, may, with highest heaven's blessing, build anew the ancient kingdom. Sencan married fair Hassania, there upon the holy hilltop. There beside the ancient waters, there he built a house and temple. There he built a mighty city, raised its walls and mighty towers. There he sat, and bare and shining on his knees, the living weapon, bright Hur-Orupaim the shining, taught men fear and love and justice long ago in ancient ages. So that's the Elder Lay of Sencan. And yeah, so that is one of the main foundation stories of the legendarium or the mythology. There's several others, obviously. Like I said, there's about 39,000 more lines of that. So, but I'll be very happy to, if anybody's got any questions. Otherwise, you've all been more than patient enough with my self-indulgence here. So. All right, well, I hope it was good. I hope the connection and everything was good. So, all right. Well, thank you all so much. You've been a lovely audience. And yeah, Ashley says, after listening to you talk about Tolkien and so many other stories for many years, this is a treat. Yeah, I really feel like in a lot of ways, all the other stuff that I do is upstream of this. But really, if there's any idea in like a traditional story that I'm wrestling with, the way that I figure it out is to sort of try to write that same story in Amboria. And that's how I come to understand it. And then I'm able to talk about it. But of course, I don't talk about the Amborian version. I talk about the sane, sensible, polite version. So as you can tell, it's actually pretty awkward for me to talk about some of these things to people. But I had good news today, which was that the role-playing game, so the core rules and then also the campaign book went to the printer today, which means they are being printed right now, which means they will be coming out soon. So I'm very happy about all of that. And I will say I'm under contract to produce another book for the role-playing game before the end of the year, which will be a book on the Holy City, Sencankar. And although there's a lot of mechanics in these games, they do have more poetry per page than any other role-playing game book anybody's ever made. I feel like I can say that with a fair amount of confidence. So they are one of the best sources you can get for the lore. The good news is that Strange Owl, the publisher, is going to be publishing an expanded version of the Akbarida. I don't have a timeline for that yet, but they are also, before that, they're going to be publishing the first two books of odes. So the books of odes are, the 5 books of odes are basically the daily office of the Amborian people. This is what they actually pray every day. And so they're going to be publishing the first 2 books of odes, more to come hopefully later, but the first 2 books of odes, but in a prayer book format. So they'll be sort of like the size of a prayer book with prayer book paper and ribbons and layout and so on. I just want to make a caveat. Please do not actually use them for actual prayer. Please use an actual prayer book from your church. But this is, it's a nice artifact to have. It's a cool thing for the game. And, Tolkien says, Jesus Christ is Lord of men and angels and elves. And we could also say of Amboria, although there he's known by another name. So, hopefully it's all to God's glory. So Anyway, thank you all very much. It's been lovely. And it's actually a big treat for me to get to read this stuff to people. So I appreciate all of you being so patient and listening in. And yeah, until next time.